right, let's do this. Haley, I'm so excited to talk to you.
How you doing?
It's, I mean, I'm sad that we're doing this remotely, but sometimes that's just the only way to get it done. So here we are.
It saves time in the car, so it's good.
I guess so. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm really looking forward. I've talked to you I've met you and talked to you before, but obviously never had a conversation like we're going to get into today. And I'm really looking forward to it. And honestly, let's just start with, tell us your story.
Okay.
Tell us why we're on this podcast.
Yeah. And I'll just give you a little background. The crazy thing was a couple of years before I was diagnosed, my father, who has passed away this year, sadly, was also diagnosed with lung cancer, but he was a 2-pack-a-day smoker and quit when he was about 65. And, obviously that was very hard on our family. And my case was that we were at the height of COVID. Actually, the crazy thing was I got my second vaccine the morning that I found out that I had cancer. So I was very excited in the morning. And by afternoon, everything went downhill. Very, very healthy. I watch what I eat. I'm a very moderate drinker. I exercise every day. I've never been a smoker. As a matter of fact, I was an opera singer in my former life.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm very cognizant of my lungs. I'm very cognizant of my health and my fitness. And we happened to be moving that week as well.
Which is one of the worst things.
Yeah,
it's really bad. Katharine Graham, who was the editor of the Washington Post, wrote this incredible biography. Her story, I think it's called, is one of the best books I've ever written. And in it, as she's on her way to the hospital having one of her children, she said, the two things women do over and over again, and when you're in the middle of it, you swear you will never do again, is having babies. When you're in the middle of labor, you're like, I could never imagine doing this again, and moving. Yeah. And I think it resonates. So anyways, I know the stress you were in under.
Yes, moving is the hardest thing. And especially because we had moved from Connecticut a year and a half before. So we were moving again, to your point. Mm-hmm. And I, went to my doctor a few days before that. And I was at the new house organizing. We hadn't quite moved yet. And I get a call from my doctor who says, hey, could you come in this afternoon? And I'm like, no, I can't come in. What's going on? And he's like, we found something on your lung. I actually during COVID, had chest tightening, thinking that I was having panic attacks. And it's not even conclusive whether it's related or not. But I had gone to see him. And since I had heart disease in my family, he wanted to do a calcium score, which is an important part of the story. And they found a mass on a routine calcium score, which normally checks your heart and basically the plaque in your heart and your arteries, the arteries around your heart, to see if you are at risk for heart disease. And that's all it was supposed to be. And they found a mass on my lung. And basically everything was slow motion, but also in fast motion at the same time, because I had to go see a surgeon that day. My internist is my guardian angel. I had to go see a surgeon that day. They put me through another scan and they confirmed that it was cancer. And they told me that within 5 days, they'd be removing half my left lung. Ooh. Yeah. And again, the things that go through your head, which are my children, my family, how could this be happening to me? And I describe it as that Charlie Brown, wah, 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 because that's all you hear from the doctor. And I would say the best thing anyone can have for themselves is an amazing advocate in the room with them at all times. And I don't know if you've talked about this in the past, but for me, if my husband hadn't been sitting with me and he hadn't fought for me through this whole process, the whole thing would have gone very differently. Because the other thing I can tell you is, going through this process, and as quickly as it had to go, we also wanted to get a second opinion very quickly as well, which in a 5-day span during COVID is not an easy thing to do. And we got a second opinion, and what it told me was there's no exact science to medicine, right? I mean, there's things that are ever evolving. There are new therapies. There are old therapies. There are people who are more aggressive. There are people who are more cutting edge. Another doctor wanted to give me chemo and radiation before they took my lung out and basically say, that the reason they do this is because it basically makes taking out the lobe more tolerable and the tumor, basically, but we didn't see that as my journey. I think it's very different when you are a 50-year-old athletic person versus a 70-year-old lifelong smoker. Your treatment should be different. And this is something we need to look into when we are treating cancer patients, and especially cancers that aren't well researched yet. There's been a major uptick in women with lung cancer who were never smokers. We are not doing enough research yet into treatments, pre-screening, all of those things. And in my case, we decided to just be aggressive, have the lobectomy. It was the craziest experience of my life. We moved on that Friday. The following Monday, I had my surgery and nobody was allowed in the hospital with me. So I showed up with my little wheelie bag at 5:30 in the morning, and there was a woman screaming at security about her husband not being able to come in with her. And I, march up to security and I'm like, I'm here to have my lobectomy. And I will tell you that the nurses were incredible during that time, knowing that people weren't allowed to come in with family members. I had 48 hours we chose St. John's because my doctor happened to be a specialist in a specific robotics technology, a patented robotics technology, where they were able to go in with 3 little holes and remove half my left lung. Yeah. So that is where that journey started and kind of, commenced through that whole first 5 days. And what I soon learned too is that your surgeon is your surgeon. And luckily I have one who keeps checking in on me, but most people don't. And the other thing that people need to be aware of is there's a whole path after you have a surgery or a treatment or care. And it's very hard to understand what your path is and what it should be. I had no ability to control my vocal cords. And as a singer, that was so depressing. I had to find an otolaryngologist on my own. My husband found this breath center where I could practice breathing. He also made me go on like 5 Zooms with 5 oncologists to make sure we were taking the right path forward. So I would say advocates are really important. It's also really important to do your research, because just because one person tells you something doesn't mean that's the answer.
I mean, everyone's body is different. First of all, there's a lot of different ways you could have started out, meaning there are a lot of people who have cancer in their family and they sort of stick their head in the sand, essentially, and don't, assume it will never happen to them and don't take care of their body, don't know their bodies, don't, have chest pains and go to the doctor and the right doctor who does the right tests. And if they're at the wrong doctor or the right doctor doing the wrong test or vice versa, insist on having those tests. I mean, that is the actual norm. So the fact that you didn't go down the road that most people go down, obviously saved your life. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal. And it's especially a big deal for a woman, for a mom in the middle of COVID after you had moved. All the things on top of it make it a really amazing thing that you did that. And you were so in touch with yourself, your body, your norm, and did something when you realized you're outside of that. I think that's hugely commendable and also a great something everyone else should try to do. And I think that in addition to that, what you were saying about having an advocate is really important. And there's this theme that I talk about over and over again, which is that in particular women, but everybody, but in particular women, have a really hard time digesting information in a doctor's office, even when you're not in the state of trauma, even when you haven't just been told you might have cancer or you have cancer and we got to get it out right away. That is, to the max, right? But women in general, when they're alone in their doctor's office with their doctor, who you might love and trust and think is fabulous, are very, we are in general, it is very difficult for us to ask the questions, to not be apologetic, to not blame ourselves right away, and to go down a road of just sort of sitting. and like listening to this person, where it's a total Charlie Brown moment. Like you said, it's like whatever they're saying, you're not really internalizing. You're not even hearing it. You might be hearing it. You're not listening to it,
It's so
whatever that is.
surreal that you can't process that this is about you.
Totally.
Yes.
And even if that means, you're in the gynecologist's office and they're talking to you while they're doing a pap smear and they're telling you something, most women are completely tuned out. Like they don't want to know. It's too hard to fathom. It's too hard to realize. It's too hard to connect with that part of your body. So 100%, I think having somebody who's there, who's taking notes, who's asking questions, who's encouraging you to figure out what you want to ask before you get into the room, and then make sure that you ask those questions and get the answers, and then do the research. So if you're incapable of doing it at that point, which many people are,
yes,
if you can have that person or people who are going to do it for you, in knowing that they have your best interests at heart. So I think those are huge points that we shouldn't gloss over. For sure.
I think you bring up a really good point too, which is that it's almost like we're scared, right? That when somebody tells us something who's in a position of authority, we take it at face value. We don't often question. Now, luckily, and I don't want to make this a male-female thing, because in most areas of my life, I am the bull in the china shop. But in this case, I needed a bull in the china shop. And luckily, my husband was one. So he was asking the hard questions that I was just taking. For instance, why would you give chemo to a 50-year-old woman who is in really good health otherwise and could, sustain the issues with, the basically the healing of having half her lung removed? Why would you give that person chemo and radiation up front? Or, why is her voice not working? Or nobody's telling us what the aftercare is or what the after treatment is. Why is nobody telling us this? Let's get some answers. So yes, that you're absolutely right. We either want to hide our heads in the sand because we're afraid of what's coming down the pike, or we just take what they say at face value. And I've become somebody who now is not afraid to find out what I have, because having faced this, head on, I understand that the alternative ain't much better. It's not much better to find out you've got something you ignored or you didn't ask the right questions, so you didn't get treated properly. I had something happen to me right after I was still in the hospital, and a radiologist misread my scan. And it was something that at first my husband and I kept to ourselves, but then started sharing with people. So when I got home from the hospital after this surgery, I was laying in bed. It was right when I got home, and up on my chart popped, you have metastasized cancer to your liver.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So it's 6:00 at night. I'm learning this information. I turn to my husband. I'm like, I have stage 4 cancer. And we both went into action. We called the internist, we called the surgeon. They're like, that's impossible. It turned out to be what they call a hemangioma on my liver, which is benign. The radiologist had misread it, which I guess happens sometimes, not often, but it does happen, obviously human error. And again, that was something that if we hadn't gone into action, or my husband hadn't started questioning, we wouldn't have gotten that answer very quickly. I had pretty much what they call stage 1 lung cancer. And, lung cancer is a crazy thing because the messaging on it it's a little off right now, I have to be honest.
So tell me why, and tell me how it should change.
Yeah. So basically, I got an email from the Lung Cancer Association a few years ago that said, if you're a smoker and you're 50, you should go have a chest CT. And it's what I had basically for my calcium score, like a low dose chest CT. And a low dose, if you're doing one baseline, let's say at 50, you're doing a baseline, you don't have anything going on, the radiation amount, especially if we can make uniform all these machines, these low dose machines, It's the same as like flying back and forth across the country like 4 or 5 times in a year.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to do that every year. You're going to get like a colonoscopy. You get a baseline.
Mm-hmm.
Mammograms also have a low dose of radiation. We accept that. We understand the health benefits versus any kind of radiation cost. So if you're going to do one baseline at 50. So I wrote a long letter to the Lung Cancer Association. I was like, well, why are you just messaging for cigarette smokers to go get these scans? And they said, well, those are the guidelines right now that we have to follow. And you're right, but there's not enough research on people like you. And so we don't message that because of, the guidelines we're given.
Well, and what insurance will cover, but that's a whole other
And
conversation.
what insurance will cover. Well, that's the big issue. You're getting to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
Which is that, I went and talked to 2 friends who are cardiologists, and 2 oncologists. And crazy enough, and I'm not a doctor, but everybody agrees with me. And, basically there's not enough money put into this research. Insurance companies don't want to cover it. But if you think about it, it's a machine that you lay in for 3 minutes. You go in, they tell you to breathe, hold your breath, you come out. You do that 2 more times and you're done. So if you think about the non-invasive qualities of that scan versus a mammogram or a colonoscopy that are covered by insurance now for everybody, I think it's like a $200 or $300 scan actually. So it would be very easy for insurance to cover it. And boy, oh boy, is it a lifesaver, because the problem with lung cancer in particular is when you have symptoms, it's too late. When you are coughing, when you are, if you have blood in your sputum, when you notice shortness of breath, all of the tightness, all of those things, a lot of times it means that the cancer is in, higher stages than operations will allow, surgery will allow. So with a low dose CT scan, I'm working on an initiative right now with a cardiologist, because for women who are 50, we all know to go get mammograms. But just to go sit in this machine for 3 minutes as a baseline, to just look at your calcium score and just get a baseline on what your lungs look like, it can save lives. And it saved my life.
I mean, we're not going to get into the discussion of, the benefits for insurance on preventive care versus treating actual, disease, because we could be talking for hours and hours and running ourselves, just absolutely mad and crazy, because the answers are so obvious. And it's such a behemoth of a machine for you and I to tackle sitting here in our kitchens for, an hour. But there's a lot to be said about that. But I do think the bigger point is about prevention, right? And so it's about preventive care.
Yeah.
And it's understanding. So there is something really important about knowing your risk and knowing if, you're at high risk because of family history, because of genetics, because of lifestyle choices. If you have been a smoker, you should definitely be more aware. But then there's just living.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's just getting older, and there's just body changes. And so I think when you really get to the heart of preventive care, it's arming yourself with the knowledge and the options that you have for all the different parts of our body. And if you know all of that, and you know to get a mammogram, to have a pap smear, to see the dentist. I mean, that's preventive care too.
Correct.
If your eyes are hurting, you should see an ophthalmologist, all the things. Well, there's also there's testing that you're talking about that is, a low dose CT scan. Well, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that was like not on the table. It was so expensive. The machines were few and far between,
and
but they aren't anymore.
Either as far as the amount of radiation being given off. Yeah. So they're able to figure that out now.
Of course, as is when you have an x-ray, like there's only so many times you're going to have an x-ray, but if you feel like your foot is broken, you're going to have an x-ray. Exactly. Right. And so, the benefits absolutely outweigh the costs. And that's something we make choices on every single day on most moments of our life. So I think when you're talking about actual life-saving preventive care measures, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So then it leads to 2 populations that you have to educate, right? It's actually the medical population, and it's doctors who can offer these kinds of preventive care measures. And then it's us, the people, the lay people. And if we're going to hone in on women, then it's women. And it's talking to, letting people know about the benefits of just being knowledgeable and taking that knowledge and making decisions. And at least then you've made the decision. Like, I've made the active decision to have a low dose CT scan or not. And I know the benefits of doing it, and I know why I shouldn't not do it, let's say. And I think it's a task that we have to take on, which is why you and I are talking right now, to help educate people that they have these options and that they exist. And then you're working with a cardiologist, which is the best thing you can do, which is you have to educate the medical community. And you and I are really lucky. We're based in, a big city in the United States of America.
Correct. Yes.
Where we're at the heart of research and some of the best doctors in the world and amazing hospitals where you can choose, so we aren't even talking about women who live in rural communities they're driving 100 miles to go see a doctor or at a hospital.
Right. There's no medical desert in Los Angeles. Right?
No.
And then you get other areas where there are no resources.
Correct. And so I think part of the job is disseminating the information into the medical community and pushing them to disseminate it themselves and to put on the table to their patients, these are the things that you should be doing and that I can offer you. And if I can't offer it here at this place where I'm physically located, I'm going to tell you 3 to 4 options where you can get this, because that is something that is a big piece missing, and it's missing less in cities like LA or New York, Chicago, Atlanta, London, Paris, whatever, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Copenhagen, I don't know. But it's still not enough in the medical community for our doctors to say, oh, Amy, you turned 50. So let's talk about what you should be doing right now. All I heard was have a colonoscopy and see a dermatologist for the dots on your body.
That's right.
That was it. It was like, you better have a colonoscopy. Okay, no brainer. Obviously, I knew that, but I'm not the general population. No one has talked to me about a chest exam. No one has talked to me about a million other things. And I don't need to do all of them, but I need to know them. I need to know my choices.
That's right. It's interesting. I lived in Greenwich, Connecticut for 6 years, and they have a really amazing breast cancer alliance there. And every year they do a huge gala, like a lunch gala, where they have models from this store that's a very chic store in the town, and everybody gets to wear Brunello Cucinelli and march around, and then they take survivors from breast cancer, and they are models too. And it's a big deal because everybody's cheering for these women. Everybody cares about these women. They talk about the resources for these women. And I was definitely one of those women. For those 6 years I was there, sitting in the front row cheering. There are 1,000 women at this event. It was always an important event for me to go to. I knew people who walked in the event, and it was so important to me. And I never knew that I was going to be somebody who was, affected by cancer. But it's interesting, there is obviously research in breast cancer. There are huge organizations created around breast cancer. And I'm certainly, a supporter of all of it. I would like to see lung cancer, especially with an uptick in women who are non-smokers who don't even know it's coming. I'd like to see some growth in support for those women too, because right now there isn't a lot. There aren't a lot of support groups. There's not a lot of research and development going into women. It's women around our age. It's women who, when you do get to around 50, obviously your body changes, your hormones change. I think that has a lot to do with this uptick too. And our generation was exposed to a lot of secondhand smoke. I would like to see that support grow in that community as well. And that's part of my initiative, because I feel that it's a very isolating, lonely place when you have a kind of cancer that doesn't have that type of support system. And I'd like to help. I'm always an open book when people ask me about my cancer. Because I mean, I've had 3 people in the last 2 weeks say, "Oh, my mom just had that." Or, "Oh, my friend just was diagnosed with that." And it amazes me. All these people pop up and they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. They don't know, I just gave the Breath Institute information to somebody. And it can be a very isolating place.
I think that lung cancer has I think to me, there's like 2 big things in talking about lung cancer that have been prohibitive in going down to making the movement that you want to have.
Yeah.
One is that I think the general population, in addition to like very large organizations like, government level, NIH, et cetera, thought they solved lung cancer when they had a really positive anti-smoking campaign out there.
For sure.
So I think that they were like, okay, wrap that up with a bow. We're done. And then because of that, lung cancer has not everywhere in the world, but it's such a stigma and such a you did that to yourself connotation.
Correct.
So it's like, oh, well, if you have lung cancer, then you either smoked or you sat in rooms with people who smoked, and those were your friends, those were your people. And it's so this really negative, shaming, I guess, is, such a popular word right now, but it's like this shameful disease where you must have caused that. Like you deserved it. And so I think that there's a whole nother side clearly to lung cancer and this horrible disease, which can be really, lung cancer, as you know, is not just incredibly deadly, but if it's not, it comes with a lot of trials and tribulations, like you were saying, when you were talking about the care afterwards. It's not a disease that if caught in stage 1, oh, good, you're done. You had surgery, maybe had some follow-up, chemo, radiation, whatever, and you're good. Well, actually, there's an incredible amount of side effects and a lifelong stigma and lifelong things that you're going to deal with. And so I think breaking down those barriers and explaining the hard truth, which is, a lot of people who get lung cancer, they had nothing to do with it. It was not their fault, in addition to pretty much all other cancers. And so I think that's a really important point that I think has been missed because of those 2 reasons I talked about. I think the general public has kind of moved on and put this real shame connotation around lung cancer, which in itself is a huge shame.
To your point, every time I say I had lung cancer, I was like, and I was never a smoker.
Yeah, it's like you have to, it's amazing.
I was never a smoker.
It's amazing. So there's this incredible breast oncologist. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Coleman. She's amazing. And she wrote a book called It's in Her Head. And it's really popular right now. She was just interviewed by Oprah. And it's all about, she's a female health historian, and she goes back centuries into really why women are so apologetic. And in particular, when it has to deal with our health, our wellness, and our medical care. Yeah. And we apologize for everything. How many times do you say I'm sorry in a day? I remember, just so much. So, right, you're at the gynecologist and you lift your arm, you're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm sweating.
Yeah.
I don't care, and that's in her book. It's like, really? You're apologizing to me that you're sweating? You should be. You're nervous. This is nerve-wracking.
It's scary as hell.
It's scary as hell. And so the idea that you, as a smart, educated, outgoing woman would, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm saying it's what we're ingrained with. I'm not shaming you. I'm saying this is what we're due to say. I had lung cancer, but I didn't smoke. It wasn't my fault. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, no, of course it wasn't, And so, and anybody you're talking to, my guess is, would have known if you were a smoker. Like, it's not something you had to put out there. But I think we've just trained ourselves, especially our generation, to make that known. Like, it's like, I remember my mom died of ovarian cancer, and she had it for 5 years, which is back in between 1993 and 1998, which was incredibly beyond unusual. Yeah. Late stage, fought it for 5 years. Never happens.
Mm.
And she spent most of those 5 years apologizing. She did have symptoms, ovarian cancer. We won't get too much into it on this podcast, but it's, very silent symptoms. And she never wanted to talk about them. She never told her doctor about them because she was totally ashamed.
Ashamed of it. Right.
She was ashamed. She didn't want to, embarrassed. She's like, I don't want to talk about the fact that I've had diarrhea for a year. And instead of being 16, if I was 48 at the time, I would have looked at her and been like, there's something wrong with that. You need to talk about it. You need to figure out why. And so I think we're just so heavily programmed. We are better than our mothers for sure. Our daughters are going to be better than us. But I think that has to be part of our mission and part of our goal of getting older and wiser to impart that wisdom of don't be ashamed, don't apologize, and you need to just arm yourself with the knowledge and the options to make good decisions, and don't be afraid of that, and don't apologize for it. Don't
be
apologize.
Afraid to ask questions, right? Like that's the other thing. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
No.
Nobody's going to think any less of you. You're not being a mean, bitchy woman. You're not, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself.
If you're not your own best advocate, no one else will be.
No one else will be.
And sometimes, as you talked about, being your own best advocate is knowing when you need someone else to do that for you. I'm in a situation where there's too much happening. I need you to be my best advocate because I don't have the ability right now. And that in itself is advocating for yourself. And no one will do that job for you ever. And I think that is like the most important lesson. I mean, how hard was it for you to get a second opinion? Not to go get it, but to put it out there and look at a doctor and say, I think you're wonderful. I trust you, but I'm going to ask someone else. I mean, that is nearly impossible for most people because they don't want to insult their doctor. They don't want to be that annoying patient. If there's a time to be insulting and annoying, it's when your life's on the line. Right?
And trust your gut, trust your instinct to ask the questions because, when we asked the question about protocol and we asked why a 50-year-old woman would be given the same protocol as a 70-year-old smoker, the answer was, it's just what we do for everybody. And so it wasn't looking at the patient, it was a protocol in place. So you're allowed to question those things. You're not obnoxious or, for asking questions. You're allowed to, not even only allowed to, you should.
You have to. You have to.
Yes. Please ask those questions. And it's actually why I've become an open book because, a lot less scares me these days for what I've had to look in the
I would think so. Yes.
Yeah. So, I always tell people, I am happy to talk to anybody. I am happy to answer questions and I'm happy to go through, a litany of things that they should be asking because we all shouldn't be afraid. We should feel empowered to ask. I think the one last thing I would want to bring up is the whole mental health component of all of this. For me and for my family, I recently learned through a discussion with my older son, who just turned 18, that he was a bit angry with us because we tried to frame everything. It's going to be okay. And I'm going to be okay. And it was the height of COVID and we had moved them here and they didn't have any friends because the world shut down when they were new to LA. And we were coping with that and another health issue with my younger son. And we were just trying to frame things in a very positive way. And when we got that misdiagnosis of the stage 4 situation, we decided to not pursue it, move on to positivity and healing. It was a joint decision between me and my husband. And we didn't really share it with my parents, with my kids at the time. We just decided to move on, even though it really affected both of us very deeply. My son later found out, both of my children, that this had happened. And my older one really expressed that he was upset that we didn't let him into the full journey. And he was old enough at the time, he felt that he needed to know everything. And it's an interesting thing because kids know more than we think they do. We can try to protect them from everything. We can try to tell them that everything is going to be okay. But to be honest, I think the better route probably would have been, here's the situation. We are strong people. We are fighters. We're going to do our best. And we are all in this together, and we all love each other a lot. And I think it was a great lesson for me to learn that my kids are strong. My kids are resilient. My kids want to be there for all of us as we are for them. And especially now that I have one going into adulthood, it's amazing. That's amazing to me, because I think about the fact that at some point I do have to respect the fact that he is kind of this fully baked human who wants to be a young adult. So it is okay to get that love from your family and not have to hide from them either, and not have to. Sure, there are certain things you probably want to wait on or frame a certain way, but your family does want to support you. They do want you to lean on them. They do want to help. Sometimes they don't even know how. So it's helpful. Like, it was helpful for me at the time to say to my kids, here's how I could use your help. Here's how I do want you to participate. It makes them feel useful. It makes them feel part of the process. It makes them feel like we're not shutting them out. And no, we don't have to tell them everything, but letting them in on a lot of it, and letting them participate and understand that, we are going through this as a family, and we're going to be positive about it. And here are the things you can do. I think that would have probably been a little more helpful for my kids.
I totally agree. I think it is very natural to be, it's very natural to put a positive spin and to put it out there as everything's going to be okay. So I'll tell you my experience with that. When I was 16, when my mom was diagnosed with cancer, I was in 10th grade at Brentwood. And my parents told us, and I have a sister who's 11 months older, and I have a sister who's 7 years older, and I have a brother who's 7 years younger. So my little brother was 10, and my oldest sister was 21. Mm-hmm. So there was a big age range. And my parents told us, my dad told us right when my mom, was diagnosed, when she immediately had a hysterectomy. My dad came home, he sat me and one of my sisters, just 11 months older, down, and said, your mom has been, they found very early stage ovarian cancer. She's had surgery. She's starting chemo right away. And the chemo is like an insurance policy. Those are the exact words he used. This is almost 27 years ago, and I can picture the whole thing in my head. And that was not the truth at all. My mom's cancer was very late, stage 2, where it was basically stage 3. And the chemo was 100% necessary and was the beginning of many different tries with different chemos. And throughout the 5 years, it was, nothing was ever put on the table. To my little brother, who was 10, should he have known everything? No, I don't think so. To me and my sister, who were 16 and 17, and then 17, 18, 18, 19, I think we could have known a lot more closer to the truth. And my oldest sister should absolutely have known what was going on. And my mom was fighting for her life. And so she was trying desperately to be as normal as possible and attend as many things as she could, and especially be there for my little brother. And I will never not commend her for that. But I think it was one of my parents' responsibilities we didn't need to know the nitty gritty, but I think that we needed to know more. And as we're now adults, in our late 40s, 50s, I can see how it has affected all of the 4 of us very differently as siblings, having been through it the way they went through it. And some anger and resentment lives on. And so I don't blame my parents. I think they did the very best they could. And back in the 90s, we weren't talking about mental health. We weren't really talking about sharing, information with your kids, and parenting was a very different. My parents parented very differently than my husband and I parent. Right. Just really because of generation, right? But I think there's something really important in what you're saying. And I think that there are levels of honesty and levels of truthfulness that are really important, because I think that no one ever, including kids, and especially older kids, want to feel like they could potentially, find out something, not from you. And I think that's a really hard thing to do as a parent, and to show our own vulnerability. I remember my mom once said to me, your life has been great. Like, you've had such a great childhood. Besides the fact that I have cancer, like, there's nothing wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your dad and I are married. We're in a happy marriage. We live a beautiful life. Like, if I didn't have cancer, everything would be totally normal. And I've really hung on to that, because I think it was her way of reminding me, like, everything's going to be okay and everything's pretty good. And I don't know how I wish that conversation would have been different, but I probably wish it would have been a little different, because I think I would have been happier for her to show her vulnerability, because I think that would have allowed me then as a grown-up to show mine more easily.
Yeah, I hear you.
And I think that's a really hard thing to do. But I do think it's important. So I think bringing that up shows a lot of character and strength on your part, Haley, and a lot of trust in your kids, and knowing that you raise them right, and that they can handle things that we might not have been able to handle when we were that age, or they're more resilient and they're stronger than we give them credit for, probably because we're afraid of them growing up, but they are,
It's so true. It's so true. Just a light at the end of the tunnel too. It was crazy when my dad passed away in March from complications from his lung cancer, or it's late February. And I came back a week after we had his funeral in Ohio, and only to find out our 12-year-old dog, who's like my little princess, had splenic cancer that metastasized to her lung of all places.
Oh my God.
And so my husband had gotten home a couple days before I did and could not tell me. Like he just was not, he couldn't tell me. And, as he said, I willed her back to health, because I ended up, doing everything and anything possible. She is cancer-free today.
Oh my God.
And my husband was like, this is like how you went into action. Like the only way that you could control something. I'm not that I could control her cancer, but like, I like went to town, and she's 12, but she's like healthy. She's got her hair back, and my husband says she's my spirit animal, like that she's the doggy version of everything I wanted to go right with cancer in the last like 5 years in our lives.
Yeah.
So
that's really cool. I love that. That's so sweet.
She's our cancer poster child now.
You know what? I think that's really sweet. And I think there's so many different ways that, that life can go. And I think that you've obviously learned lessons that no one should have to learn, but it can positively really change your life, right? And it's knowing that fighting is an option, and knowing that being strong is an option, and knowing that using your strength to put it into others is an option. And I think that's a really, powerful lesson to learn, usually only learned the hard way. But when you do, and you grab onto that, and then you use the strength that you've got, Haley, through your I don't even know the word experience, with lung cancer, and in your family and losing your dad, I think to change it into such a positive role and role model for your kids and for others, and to make change. I mean, that's the best gift you can give. It really is.
And it's the only thing you have control. Thank you for saying that, but it's the only thing you have control over. You only have control over the things you can control. And if you choose to make them positive, and you choose to be vulnerable, as you said, and you choose to learn lessons, I'm definitely more calm than I used to be. I don't worry about things as much as I used to.
Yeah.
That it's all going to be okay. Like, and it is all a journey, and it is all you just have to move forward every day. And stay on that path. And again, like, my biggest goal is to just be a resource for other people who are going through it. That's it.
And I think even bigger than that, you're not just a resource for other people who are going through particular lung cancer. You are becoming a resource for, how to interact with your doctor, how to be an advocate, how to ask the questions, how to initiate change, how to take control, how to gain knowledge. I mean, that's bigger than your story, and that's incredible. And so there are a lot of people that don't go down that road once they've been through something so hard. So I think it's pretty awesome that you are. And as a partner in that, I'll do whatever I can to help help you build that platform, because that's really my goal in life too, is just to be able to empower, in particular, women to take control of their health and wellness and understand what preventive care means. And to me, those are like the three pillars of living a healthy, happy life.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate your podcast. It's so important. And, you taking the time to really put yourself out there and have people on that are just educating others about this whole crazy roller coaster ride is so important. And thank you for doing it.
It's absolutely like a pleasure. So thank you for coming on.
Thank
I'm
you.
really happy to see you. I'm really happy you're healthy, and just onward and upward. We'll keep doing good things.
Perfect. Great to see you. Thanks.
Thanks, Haley.
For having me on.